Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Build Amazing Things Securely. I'm absolutely thrilled today to be joined by Santiago Bernhardt. I'm going to let him introduce himself. He will do it much better than me. We're going to dive into the crazy world of IoT security. But let's start at the very beginning. Santiago, who are you as a person? Who are we listening to today?
Hi, Laura. Thank you for inviting me to come and talk to everybody today about building secure things. Um, so I'm an Argentinian guy that ended up in New Zealand about 10 years ago. And I was always an infrastructure background person because everybody was moving into the cloud. I ended up learning the new technologies, and I had to migrate to the cloud for different businesses, and I ended up understanding how to work in Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS. Even though I'm mainly an AWS person, I always have passion for building infrastructure in general and building secure things. I have been working in a couple of big places in New Zealand. I'm going to call them big places for New Zealand.
It's all right.
And now I'm
We all know
working.
New Zealand places are always small. Big
And
to
now I'm
us.
working for this company that is trying to change the way that the world should be running IoT devices. We can deep dive into that in the next part of the
Yeah,
session.
absolutely. I'm intrigued. But you're alluding to quite the adventure here because I feel like your pathway wasn't quite as straightforward as that sounded in that little intro. So how did you
Yeah,
get your dream job in IoT?
this is an interesting part. I was working a couple of years ago. I think I was working at uh, Deloitte, or probably Atomic. I was in Atomic for a while, helping them build a platform after they did the pivoting. And in one of the school parents' nights, I met this person that was just arriving to New Zealand with his family. We ended up randomly chatting during this school kids performance or something, and he introduced himself as, "Oh yeah, I'm here. I'm an American person. I'm going to be building this thing. I'm coming from Microsoft, and I'm going to be building this thing to change the world in IoT." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds really interesting." So I switched into my, oh, I'm not a nerd with them with most of the parents, to start being a super nerd with with this person asking questions, and it was like mind blowing, his vision into the current problem that he was seeing right now with bridges. And we're talking about 5 years ago, right? And there were already bridges of, I don't know, for example, hotels being breached by, I don't know, a Raspberry Pi at the time being
Mm.
unhooked. Somebody was using that port to do something else, and in the way that the networks were working, and how to compromise those level of IoT devices. And they were, okay, what happens with the IoT world is you have a huge range of IoT device types. You have devices that they might be inside your fridge, inside your car, inside an airplane, inside a nuclear power plant, and they might be doing really complex things or very small things that they might be uh, extremely risk averse. And if something really tiny compromises that, it allows lateral movement around the entire enterprise or office building or whatever, and can cascade into dramatic problems. Um, and for me, it was like mind blowing. I'm like, that's actually right. I'm like, um, and what are you doing to fix this problem? And he was like, oh, I'm building an operating system around SEL4. And I don't know if I'm going to clarify what SEL4 is in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
You tell us what we need to know.
and the story was, oh, just tell me about it. Because again, I was very naive on that sense. Even that I've been a Linux person for many, many years, I think I heard of SEL4. I say, oh, there's a thing there, but I never look into it. So the story was, okay, SEL4 is it's a microkernel, and it's pretty much a second generation microkernel that is designed to be formally verified and assured performance and security. And that's the main purpose of it. And being a microkernel, it means that there has a ridiculous amount of less um,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. I
lines of
mean,
code.
hold up a second. I'm going to have to pause because back when
Yeah,
I was a student, I remember having that lecturer who taught me about formal methods and being able to, verify the
yeah,
security and the functionality of something mathematically. Are you saying that
yeah.
we're now actually doing that really for something? Because back then it
Yes,
was all theory. Wow.
yes. So we have several people in the team right now that they are they are part of the contributors of SCL4, which means that the team is very technical in a great way. I
Wow.
mean, they're like
Cool.
so clever people to work with. Um, yeah. So the idea is, of course, formal methods using mathematical instructions for verification. So when there is an input, we are going to assure that there is a desired trusted output. And that's the complexity of formal methods, right? Because in standard processing, in non-SEL kernels, what you have is, again, a bunch of services that they will receive an input, process it, and send it back. And then the kernel will grab it and do something else. There's no trust between pretty much each process and the scope of each process when it started and when it finished, and how it can move and connect to the other sub-services. So the idea of building this operating system was, okay, everything that is going to be loaded inside the device, it needs to be trusted within the service layers without impacting performance and everything that comes behind it.
How hard could that be? For anyone who's been out there trying to do that level of assurance, that's super hard. I'm going to just also give the audience listening at home a little bit of a why am I smiling? Why does this story make me happy? New Zealand is an incredibly small place. We have the idea of 2 degrees of separation rather than 6. And I love the idea, Santiago, that you met another super nerd at a parents' evening. And that the origin of this was super nerding at your school thing. That couldn't be more Kiwi if it tried. Okay, so you met an amazing person. You're on this adventure. What happened next?
Yeah, so they were talking about this thing back then, and I randomly catch up with Boyd for a couple of years. I think like every 6 to 9 months, we will get a random beer or get a coffee or lunch, and he will show me, oh, now the operating system can do this. Now this other thing, this is the progress. And it was like really interesting because at that time I was like, oh, it's actually getting together now. It's becoming real. And I was always coming with like challenging questions into like, how are you going to be planning to manage the devices? How are you going to be planning to get the devices deployed to be, interconnected with each other? Because that's also where the next level of the challenge comes in. And they were like, oh, what we're going to do is we're going to have a lot of VPNs that they're going to connect everywhere. So everything is going to be trusted by internal and external VPNs everywhere. And I'm like, wow. I love networking. When you start talking about those layers, I mean, it can get really, really, really complex in terms of like, cyber network calculations, routing path, and trusting all of that in a secure way, internal DNS of the subsystems and everything. So again, the chats were like really, really deep.
I feel like you met your tech BFF just randomly. This is amazing. Okay, so we've decided that we're going to conquer the world with some crazy scaled networking, and we've got our super secure, mathematically proven operating system. What came next?
So what came next was, the company was in the search of building this platform around the devices, so the devices can be connected and all of this stuff. In parallel, the company is trying to identify exactly what are the needs of the different customers, because of course, when you start in this spectrum, you have, again, let's say car manufacturers, defense systems for entire nations that they might be interested in this thing at different layers. So they were like, okay, every single one of them are going to have a different requirement. They're going to have to, for example, self-host this in an on-prem air-gap facility, or maybe just in a huge lab, or they're going to want to have it in their own Google Cloud, or in their own Azure subscription, or in their own AWS account, or they're going to want to use our multi-tenanted environment because, again, it still needs to be Azure, but maybe not extremely, I'm going to call it, somebody's going to die if this fails, type of IoT device. And they don't want to deal with all the self-hosting and managing all of that. That was pretty much when the company came to me and said, hey, do you want to come and help us brainstorm what we can do about it? And I was like, I love building platforms in general, but the challenge is very interesting because it's not like, a standard product, we're going to build it, let's say, for AWS or for Azure, and we're going to self-host it, and that's it. We need to give this one-click deployment experience and continuity for the customers in a way that, again, this needs to be secure in their own environment, get continuous updates. The entire platform needs to be tied out in a very, I'm going to call it simple design, but still robust enough so they understand what they're deploying. following standards for certain certifications, and so on. So I joined them about 9 months ago, and the
Oh,
main planning was,
congratulations.
yeah. So the main idea was, okay, I'm gonna help them put plans in place for all of this. Um, and it's been a really interesting journey. We definitely got the platform. Um, I'm gonna call the beta platform in place. It can be self-hosted in AWS and Azure. It can be self-hosted on-prem. We are um, in the making of actually deploying a multi-regional one for kind of like devices can be connected to our hosted version, and customers can just pay for it, um, which was really
This is
interesting.
cool.
Um, yes,
So let's talk a little bit. I want to kind of talk about how and where this can be applied then. So you mentioned it at the start about how many different IoT
yeah,
devices and types of devices we have, and how many of the breaches we were seeing and have continued to see over the last 5 years have been
yes,
related to these lower security devices being in higher security environments.
yes.
So, you're now really on the edge of trying to solve that problem. Um, what devices are you kind of focusing on first? Where do you think the real need is?
Yeah, one of the main companies that we are main industries that we are actually engaging with at the moment is the car manufacturing industry. There's a car manufacturing brand that is really interesting in this product, especially since after in the last year or so there have been a couple of breaches of the Tesla cars, the
Mm,
Ferraris, and a couple of other ones, and also with all of these breaches of the physical device itself. People, let's say, for example, cutting behind the door, connecting through the cables that are behind the door, and getting raw access to the internal network of the car and things like that. So again, in this scenario, what we are trying to get together is how an entire car, for example, is going to work in the with all the moving parts that they have. It's just not a single IoT device inside a car. There are like hundreds of micro IoT devices, uh,
wow. I
with a
mean,
central computer, and yeah,
yeah, we never think about it, right? I think we don't all have flash new cars, but the newer a car is, the more of these devices are built in. And,
yeah,
as a security person and a software engineer, I'm kind of conflicted here. It's a
yeah,
great thing. I'm getting a really lovely car and a really great experience, but the security person in me is like, oh my goodness, that's so many attack surfaces.
yeah.
Um,
Can I get
so
hacked when I'm, driving in the motorway and somebody push the brakes, or change the steering tension or something, and I can, fail on a curb. Those are kind of like, let's say life-threatening attacks. But you
mm,
can also have the basic attacks of somebody sitting nearby, just opening the car and then taking something that is, like
and
belongings, or similar.
absolutely. And I think in the news this week there was an article about Tesla is using the Internet of Things devices in their cars to
Yeah,
monitor driving behavior and adjust the restrictions and the insurance policies around the use of the car. So, if I'm having a bad day and I slam on the brakes a few too many times, that's going to turn up in the data and that's going to turn up in my premium. Now, as an
yeah,
attacker, if I know I can cause you, Santiago, massive pain by telling a car that you've been a terrible driver this week, even if you're a
mhm,
wonderful driver, there's
yeah,
going to be a subset of people who think that's really fun.
yeah.
And this is something they want to do to disrupt people. So it's quite fascinating when you start thinking about the breadth of the risk there in cars.
And it becomes really complex as well, because it's on that sense you're going to have people that they own the cars, and they're going to try to mock their local systems, to prove different things, and that goes at all levels. You're going to have the internal attacker that it wants to, reduce the digital millage, let's call it in this way, and also you're going to have the other attacker that is the one that wants to do something, to your property. um, and that's one example. And also how, for example, all the sub uh, IoT devices within the car, they get updated if it's something that needs to happen according to, you know um, a set of conditions, like, the car needs to be stopped, not running, or whatever, or they need to be
Mhm.
updated actually when something is happening, like running or braking or whatever, because the brakes are failing, or things
That's
like that.
terrifying.
it's really terrifying. And the same thing, imagine applying. I mean, in a car it's complex, but imagine in a plane, in things like that they go beyond all of
Far
that.
out.
Really interesting. Um,
This is really cool, Santiago, and I think it's definitely not something I'd spent a lot of time thinking about. But um, that updating thing. I mean, if you think about the Internet of Things devices around me right now, there's
yeah,
probably at least 100 in this office. Um,
yeah,
and I'm going to be really honest, unless I've been able to obviously figure out how to turn on automatic updating, they're not getting updates.
yeah.
So, how do you approach updating when your devices are deployed in so many different environments?
So yeah, so going back in time to my, I'm gonna call it my official meeting. The founder of the company, um, he was telling me this idea of the same thing. It's like the idea is that the enterprises signing to use our product eventually, what they're gonna be getting is this continuous possibility to keep the operating system up to date if they decide to. Uh, Again, this is where I think that nowadays we have this global problem that there is no how's it called, like legality around, or nobody can actually get a lawsuit for saying, hey, you're selling me a device that after
Yeah.
1 year, in the contract, it's not going to receive any more updates.
Yeah,
And the
we have
idea
no
of
obligations, no requirements that say that they have to do that.
Yes, and the idea of automatic updates is always tricky, right? Because that depends on each of the device and the purpose. But the idea is
Mm,
to always offer that if the company wants to update the devices that are using this technology, they should be able to push devices to, at least with our technology. That was the main goal of it. Um, so we definitely have this concept of over-the-air updates, which is the standard procedure. And regardless of where the platform is going to be hosted, if it's self-hosted or on-prem or something, what the devices are always going to be doing is the platform is not going to push anything to the devices. So the platform itself doesn't know where devices are located, if they are alive or not. The idea
mm.
is devices are satellites. They come back, they call home.
They
They
pull.
Yes, pretty much it's like they say, hey, I'm here, I'm alive, this is my status. And then the operating system, the platform itself is going to say, okay, based on the conditions that we have for you, this is what needs to happen now. It's like just send
Mm,
us data, or here's an update, apply it under these conditions. And then the device itself will do whatever needs to happen and then report back saying, hey, I have this. During that connectivity, there is a lot of security involved as well in the way that how do we assure that the updates are secure, trusted, and all of that. And that
yeah.
happens around the technology of the operating system with a digital manifest that pretty much has encryption keys saying, hey, I'm signing this manifest with this thing. And then there is an exchange of keys saying, okay, I accept your key, so now you can upgrade. And also there is a networking tunnel established between the devices and the platform. So all traffic
Mm.
is highly encrypted as well.
What I love about this is a really good demonstration of when you're building a system, whether it's you're updating Internet of Things devices in a car, or it's you've got point of sale terminals in a store that your software helps support. You have to think about the direction of that connection. So, for example, because your devices pull those requests in, you're
Mhm.
reducing that risk of you compromise the central point in that network and just push
Yeah,
malicious things to everyone.
yeah,
But that's not enough, right? And I love the layered approach you're talking about here with encryption, with keys, and with making sure that each transaction is considered independently as a security thing rather than just as, one control to fix them all.
yes, yes, and
Yeah.
and and that has been part of like the, I'm gonna call it this way, like the SaaS platform that control the devices. During this the software architecture of that part has been a really fun journey in a good way. Understanding how um, the sub processes of that, they need to isolate the requests that they come from each of the devices in real time with sub processes or just individual pods, depending the different deployments approaches that we have. If it's Kubernetes, splitting into multiple workspaces and things like, which make a solution that will be three pods super simple with a load balancer super complex because they need
Yeah.
to have sub networks and sub rules and layers of isolation.
So,
um,
so that links really nicely into my next question. So, obviously, the dream, if we could all have our own way and wave our magic wand, would be that every Internet of Things device was treated with so much respect and so much caution when it came to security. So that whether you were
Yeah.
buying, a pair of bathroom scales or a toaster or a car, that there was no vulnerability in it. Do you think it's realistic that the level of security that you're building in for cars right now could one day be available to a wider selection of devices, or do you think that there will always be risk from IoT devices?
I mean, this is my personal opinion.
Of course, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Hope that we get there. Like
Yeah,
um, I believe that the world needs to be way more secure than it is today. And I think the risk happens at those layers. I mean, of course, there is human risk always in clicking something that you shouldn't and getting compromised, by that attack vector. But that is an attack vector that you can train people on into like how to, prevent phishing, how to use good hygiene or security practice for, day-to-day mobile and desktop technologies. But the IoT devices that, as you were mentioning before, they are set and forget most of the time.
yeah.
Um, and you don't have this uh, general console for visualizing things or getting them to, be out of dated if they are something non-critical. Um, yeah, it's a complex topic. It's the typical topic that I get angry most of the time with my really old modems or, yeah, some of the devices, for example. I have a couple of dehumidifiers and panel heaters that they are IoT, and I think that they received the last update like 3 years ago when I bought them. um,
I'm firstly very confused that a dehumidifier would be IoT, and also now thoroughly kind of intrigued to think what's the worst you could do with an unpatched dehumidifier. Maybe that's a question for the audience at home. Don't do crime, that's bad. But if you were,
yep.
in the same network as an unpatched dehumidifier, is there
I
actually
mean,
something you could do with that?
we can expand into what could potentially happen. As a
Sure.
and call it worst case scenarios with those devices because I always I'm curious about it. So what I have done is I have created a separated VLAN in my network just for the IoT devices because also
Mhm.
I've been scanning the network of what the IoT devices they do. I mean they have this web interface and on your phone you can control them and set the temperature, create some automation rules pretty much where if it's 30 degrees outside I will shut them off. If it's 16 I will put them on 20
Mhm.
degrees or something. So super basic automation. So the problem is that these devices are so noisy. They are always opening and closing ports, talking to this mothership uh, in the provider. But the problem is that the authentication doesn't follow any tokens or anything like that. So pretty much, if somebody is actually picking up that connectivity, they could connect back and probably get inside the devices and move laterally to just scan my network, for example, and know how many devices do I have and my MAC addresses and things like that. And again, this is how things can go really, really bad. Somebody can mock, I don't know, the MAC address of one of my mesh devices and simulate my network and start scanning traffic. And there are really bad things that can happen when you work with sensitive data. I'm not saying that I'm a target, but when you talk about people of interest, a
Mm.
super small device like this can actually bring down, probably an office or something that is actually high interest, like, a defense system or something in
Yeah.
politics or complex things
I
like that.
think this is really interesting for our audience who are listening today. So, a lot of us, we're involved in building software and we may not feel like it's very sensitive. If you're the lead engineer building the automation on a dehumidifier, you're probably kind of feeling pretty safe right now. What's the worst that could happen? Everything gets a little bit moist. I'm being intentionally simple there. But really, it's our risk from IoT devices isn't about the device itself. It's about its context and the neighborhood it lives in on our network, right? The other
Yeah,
things it has access to. And I think that's going to be such an incredible engineering challenge over the next, decade as we really start to understand, well, can we all have VLANs all the time? Or if we can't do that, we can't expect a normal household to take those
yeah,
controls. What controls can we put in place as engineers to reduce that risk?
yeah. I think that, I mean, the simplest of all the actions that anybody can take is probably changing the default DNS on their modems at home. That would be the main thing that I would recommend to all my friends. Is going with something like Quad9 or the Cloudflare Families protection, or one of those. At least, if the device gets compromised and is trying to call to a random malicious website, or that is not an IP address to actually get,
Mm,
like over the DNS, that request will get blocked. Um, in the majority of the cases, that's how malware is going to work. It's going to be very random that it actually goes to one particular IP,
yeah.
which again can happen, but that becomes more complex for the local networks to, to be protected, especially in households. But
Yeah.
um,
This is really fascinating, Santiago, and I think I've definitely got a lot to think about. So you gave us some good advice there with, changing our local DNS. As an engineer, which
yeah.
bit of all of this problem that you've been working on, the securing of IoT devices for primarily at the moment use in vehicles, which bit are you most passionate about? What's the most exciting thing coming in the next few years?
I think that, I mean, for me is um, the level of surprise that we can have working in this company. I think it's like we don't really know what kind of industry is gonna knock on the door and say, "Hey, we have this problem. We believe that SCL4 is the answer." Uh, like we like the idea of having all things secure. Um, and that sounds amazing. I mean, again, I want to be surprised by saying to my friends in a couple of years, "Hey, we built what is inside your thing. That is at your house. So, have you seen blah? The devices are powered by our operating system, and that sounds really, really good."
Yeah, I
um,
think that's a pretty amazing thing to be building. And it's totally on theme for this podcast.
yeah,
Just to bring it all together for our audience at home. This has been a really great and interesting chat. So thank you so much for your time, Santiago. Um,
yeah.
if you have any links to share, we're going to pop them in the notes of the podcast. So we might pop some useful things in there for you to have a dig into. Um, if you're watching or listening to this and you are an engineer and you're in the IoT space or you're curious about it, getting started looking at what those devices are doing, what they're built from, what signals they're sending and receiving. And if not, look at your own car and perhaps you'll see your car a little bit differently after this chat with Santiago. So thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. No, thank you, Laura. It's been good fun, and yeah, looking forward
Awesome.
to seeing what people wants to build.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.